Obviously, we were all in quarantine and just doom scrolling through Twitter, and I remember every single day I would wake up and there would be some other horrible news story, and I just felt so helpless to everything that was going on. So I was really attracted to the idea of, one, being able to work with other people when we were all kind of stuck at home, which was a hard thing to do, and two, to actually get involved in the political process, especially during that election cycle, and feel like I was actually contributing and making a difference to everything that was going on at the time.
And so when I heard about Students for Justice and how it was nonpartisan, very targeted work, focusing on these rural Black and brown majority communities, encouraging voter registration, it just sounded very meaningful.
That's why our work is so important, because we're educating people and we're getting out the vote and we're making sure people are cognizant of what's going on around them and making sure things are in as plain terms as they can for people to understand.
I would need to have a job at campus to help pay for tuition otherwise. So Students for Justice was able to give me the opportunity to do this work and make it a big commitment, which is what I wanted to do.
Everything we learn, everything that we are doing is something that will have real life impact.
After our postcard writing campaign to South Carolina, we actually saw an uptick in calls to the County Board of Elections. And then we can use the November election as an example where voter turnout was incredible.
Despite the time zones and the different locations, we were all able to come together on a Zoom call and figure out how we were going to push out an ad on Facebook, or how we were going to phone bank or text bank and try and get people to register who maybe had been deregistered. The remote medium was helpful, not a problem that got in the way of us being able to get things done. So this was a really great opportunity, especially through the marketing track, to be able to really get involved and look at numbers and slice and dice the data. And especially when we had to do those marketing track presentations, I was freaked out about having to speak in front of strangers on Zoom at first, but by the last one, it just felt very comfortable and conversational. So I think that helped my just general interview and presentation skill set. And then the marketing aspect of it was a great thing to put on my resume that actually helps me score an interview this week for a full-time job after graduation.
We were working in the summer, and then we said, okay, we have to work in the fall, and then we heard about the Georgia runoff elections. We're like, okay, we're gonna do this again in the winter. And every time that we started up again, we learned that we reached a lot of voters who might not have known that they were taken off registries. And we kind of made sure that people understood that their voices were heard with the postcards and with the text banking and the phone calls. It was really nice hearing speakers, talk about what jobs are in politics or their experiences organizing protests and things like that. I met Robert, which was amazing. He was my mentor. And I think that, Robert's had a history of organizing and being really involved in politics, and just being able to sit with him we spoke for a long time in our meetings. We would take up an hour, and I learned so much from him.
There were a couple times where I would contact someone and they said, oh yeah, I heard about early voting, but I don't quite know what that is. And so I could tell them, here's where you go, here's when it's open, here's what you need to bring in terms of photo ID. And people, were like, oh, great. And then that with that information, they'll actually be able to do it. And if they hadn't had someone directly make that contact, who knows if they would have voted.
My mom told me that I was the person who made her realize how important voting was. Till I started doing this and actually writing the postcards, she said, well, I never realized how important voting was and how important the elections were, because honestly, the lower level systems of government is what affects her everyday life.
I do think that it was born out of a very specific moment, which was needing to connect when we were all stuck at home, and especially with the 2020 election cycle, which needed youth participation and youth turnout. But I think that it was a great way to get people involved in the process who weren't in the process, and that there's still very much, and I think will always be, a need for a program like Students for Justice that educates people who feel like the process is inaccessible to them to get them involved.
I think it absolutely has a future. It's something that I worry about, that we're only making these big pushes for voter outreach in election years when we think that it matters, but it matters all the time, especially in off years when there's not much work going into reaching these disenfranchised voters.
You know, I think a lot of people didn't realize how powerful people our age are when it comes to the, again, social media. We were able to kind of mobilize through different apps and kind of have a new perspective on how to reach people in ways that are not as necessarily traditional.
Being in Students for Justice made me realize that I want to work somewhere where I feel like I'm actually making a difference and contributing to a project and engaging with people who think differently than the way that I do. And it definitely made me realize that I want my work to have meaning, and especially in the way that it did in Students for Justice. So I think I'm going to be chasing that high for a very long time.